Charbel, it's on now. Can you hear me? I had it turned on. You should be able to hear me now. You can hear me? There? Ooh, that is low. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Yeah? Turn it off.
Is this mic on?
No,
Oh, okay.
but I will turn it on.
Because I turned that one off, but he said he's still here in the room, so
You still, oh, I do have,
I turned the main switch all the way off.
I do have one on the internal mic.
Oh,
You want me to turn it off?
let me ask him that. Yeah.
You want me to turn it off?
I guess not, unless there's some other activity back here or people, but I guess not. Yeah, then you got to turn.
There's going to be a delay. Just tell me when. Are you on? Are you still on the stream? Okay. Yeah, do you see me up there right now, though? All right. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, testing. Testing. Charbel, can you hear me all right? Testing, 1, 2. Testing. Testing, testing, 1, 2. Can you hear me? just turned it on, so in a couple seconds you should hear something. Tell me when you see. Okay. So, right now I'm not by the mic, so you hear like background sound. Give it a sec, that's the delay. I just turned it on. So you should be, any second actually hearing something. Nothing. All right, I'm gonna go test, all right? This is the only mic that's on. Testing, 1, 2, testing, 1, 2, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, is that better? You're saying that's not good. It's just that, is that just like an area mic? Hold on.
1, 2. 1, 2, okay. All right.
We're testing right now.
Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2, all right.
Are you hearing anything?
1, 2. 1, 2, okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2, all right. 1, 2. 1, 2, okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2, all right. 1, 2. 1, 2, okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, we should have pretty good meter on OBS. Check, check. 1, 2. All right. Check. 1, 2. Test. Check. 1, 2. Check. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Check. 1, 2. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, check 1, 2.
You still see the live feed? It was
Yeah, it happened about 3 times, so now we're testing. Check 1, 2, testing the podium microphone. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, so now we're testing with the volume output up higher. Testing 1, 2, podium microphone. Check, check. 1, 2, 3. We'll go a little higher there just to get a. We can go a little bit too loud. We can always bring it back. Oh, thanks. Sorry. All right, check 1, 2, test 1, 2. Testing podium microphone. 1, 2, 3. We'll go a little higher there just to get a.
That's way better.
Okay.
We can
Sounds
go a
good.
little bit too loud. We can always bring it back. Oh, a little bit too loud. We can always bring it back. Oh, thanks. Sorry. All right, check 1, 2, test 1, 2. Testing podium microphone. 1.
Everybody, hello. This, oh well. Hello. Can everybody start taking their seats? We're trying to figure out if we need more seats. And there will be, we actually have a live stream, so we're not going to start immediately. And there will be time to mingle outside on the lawn after the service. So please come in and take a seat if you can. Thanks. Hello, I have one. These are not my actual remarks, but I need to make an announcement. There is a Honda CRV license plate 9RFR398 or 0, I can't tell, that is blocking a car. It's trying to get out of their property. So I don't know whose that is, but you probably ought to move it. Okay, this is actually for real. I think we're actually ready to start. Thanks to everybody here for coming to celebrate the life of our beloved partner Bob Denham. I first want to just say thank you to Jeff and Laura and their families for what was an absolutely beautiful service. I only hope that some of us who have the privilege of making remarks today can do anything even close to what your family did. That's a hard act to follow. So I'm going to introduce the first speaker, who's Ron Olson, and then so he will know who to introduce. The list is right here. And then we'll have a series of speakers, some folks that at least the young people in the Munger Tolls crowd may not even remember or know. But this is, we brought people who just love Bob, and Bob loved them. So first, Ron, it's yours.
Thank you. As Brad said, wow, what a hell of a crowd. And wow again, what a hell of a family. Spectacular, beginning to end. I did have to do a little adjusting of things I hoped to say, given really the powerful tributes that all of you delivered. Where is Carolyn? Right there. You've got to be so proud of that family, Carolyn. And I think, well, first of all, let me tell you, I'm going to, this is the challenge of the day. I told the colleagues behind, I asked them what they were going to say. Well, we'll talk about Bob as a lawyer. So I said, okay, then I'll talk about Bob the person. Well, Bob the person has been pretty well covered. In fact, it was so moving, so wonderful and true. You know, I can't help but underscoring a little bit of it. You all know that he loved you more than anything else in the world. And that came through, so I'm going to leave that right where it is. But I think I can speak on behalf of Bob. We spent, after all, every year together since 1970, and many, 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 many things we did together, both fun and work. But speaking on his behalf, everyone here should know that the feelings expressed today toward Bob were mutual. Bob had the same feelings about that family, and you particularly, Carolyn. We all knew the pride that Bob had in how you excelled in higher education. And we also observed something that, you know, I suppose some of the rest of us it's not as easy to see. The kind of a participation, yes, you made that plain. Where's Jeff? I can't even see him. Raise your hand. Where is he? Oh, there you are. I mean, it was amazing. But he also made accommodations. He wanted you to excel as he excelled in his profession. And you surely did, and you made him so, so proud. And I'm not spending a lot of time talking about how he thought about you children. You know, and you said it better than I could ever say it. And that goes for the grandchildren in spades. It was a true demonstration of family love and respect, and very meaningful. But I will add again that bringing all of you together each year in France was the highlight of Bob's life. He enjoyed that more than anything I think he experienced throughout the rest of the year, including all of those trips you made into the kitchen to make him happy. But you should also know that for us partners and friends that are here today, his efforts to enrich our lives were no less at all. Bob was, as somebody, I can't remember which one of you said, was an incredible listener. That's an understatement. Bob was one of those persons who, it didn't make any difference whether he was speaking to a client, to a young lawyer, to a friend. he listened intently. And he listened as long as it took for that person to explain everything that person wanted him to hear. And when he was sure that person was done, he would then use that slow Texas drawl. It drove me crazy sometimes, to be honest. I tried to complete a sentence a couple of times. That didn't work either. I wasn't smart enough. But that slow Texas drawl would then be used to probe about what he thought he had heard. And only then would you hear advice from Bob. It was after he truly understood. And beyond that, he was, as all of you said, kind, gentle, and generous. Believe it or not, those were the three summaries that I had that you all delivered. I can't remember one time hearing Bob raise his voice in the law firm. Not one time. And I also never heard him raise it even if there was a obnoxious lawyer he was dealing with on the other side. He was within himself at all times. And it was impressive. He and I shared a lot of things, but we shared a favorite preacher at that church that you all were in today. One of the things he said that I remember the two of us reflecting on more than once, there's nothing so strong as real gentleness, and nothing so gentle as real strength. Bob understood that. In fact, I think it was in his DNA from the day he was born. Those traits of self-control, gentleness, kindness, I got to admit, for me, it's been a little more challenging. Now, I want to say a couple things about his generosity, but before I do, I think it's important to say Bob could laugh, and laugh well. One of his ways of laughing, and I should say always laughing with you, not at you, was to point out the little foibles of all his partners along the day that went by. And I can tell you, I didn't escape many of those. He was almost as good as the person who's going to speak after me. Where is she? Nancy Bekovac. But Nancy had me going as well. Maybe in any event, I'll leave you for another day, Nancy. Let me say just a couple of things about his laughter. It was genuine, and he could use that same laughter regarding himself. I'm going to tell just one story, only one today. And of course, Janie, my wife, said, "Don't you dare use it." Well, if after all these years, 61 in June, if I can't defy that advice once in a while, what the hell? This was a story fairly early in Bob's career. He was traveling to San Francisco with his client, Rick Guerin. Some of you, I talked to some of you earlier today about Rick. Rick has departed as well. But Rick was a character, and he was one of Bob's favorite clients. They were riding up in Rick's little Cessna airplane. Rick was a pilot, and he was in the pilot's seat. Bob and those big long legs were in the seat right behind Rick. It was one of those fog hanging days up there in San Francisco. And the plane would circle and circle and circle. And as it circled, the pressure Bob was feeling increased, increased, increased until it got to the point where he just was scrambling around that little area beside him. Could he find a paper cup? Could he find a tin cup? Could he find anything? But that brilliant mind came up with an answer. He had just gotten a brand new briefcase. He carefully, as he told the story on himself, removed the papers, then took off his tie and his dress shirt, and then pulled his t-shirt over his head and carefully lined that new briefcase. He got relief. Not the end of the story. They get off the plane. He and Rick are walking ahead. Bob gets in the terminal, and as he walks in, there's this big garbage can. You know, you've seen them there in the terminal. He takes that briefcase and wham, throws it in there. And the guy behind him came up and looked at him. Wow, you've had a hell of a day already? Bob was laughing harder than I was, but I want to get to his generosity. I know you've spoken to it, but it was for real. Externally as well as internally, I observed. In the law firm, we use a unique and some think silly way to divide our net income every year. We ask every partner to take that net income number and write down what he or she thinks should be allocated to every partner, including oneself. We do that in part to counter what we were taught. Roy Tolles made it plain that it's human nature to overvalue oneself. And that's true for most people. But I want you all to know that when Bob's number was put in, many of the times it was below what the consensus of his partners was. That kind of internal generosity was noticed. You've already hit all his nonprofits and good things there, but I want to underscore that his generosity remained to the very end. One of his last acts was to give his kidney to a friend who was in line for a replacement. And finally, I want to deal with his illness by telling you how he dealt with his illness. I saw him in the hospital after his first operation. He lost in that operation a big part of the muscle in his thigh, and he spent weeks and months rebuilding his strength and balance. After he got home, where's John Frank? John and I would check in with him periodically, and one of the things we'd check on is whether or not we could give him a ride downtown to the California Club for our monthly Sunset Club meeting. There were a lot of sunsetters in the church. I'm not seeing many right now, but in any event, Bob often took us up on it, and it was meaningful for John and me, and we hope for Bob. But it was a way that we could check on how he was doing and get a little bit of that special Bob Denham time. And I have to tell you that that was anything we could do to get time with him was worthwhile. And that was true even after he came home from the hospital the last time. I visited him. I knew and he knew that he had been thrown throughout this illness what I call an unhittable pitch. It was challenging. It was a unique disease, and he knew treatment would be challenging. But what I really want you to know is that never, not once did he show one little bit of self-pity. That was not Bob. In that last visit, that last week, just before I left, I pulled up my chair next to Bob in that, I guess you'd call a lounge chair that he had. I leaned over and said a prayer that he and I had heard for years at the start of every Sunset Club meeting and dinner. Lord, behold those assembled. Give us peace, gaiety, and the quiet mind. Give us the strength to encounter that which is to come, so that we may be brave in peril, constant in all changes of fortune, and that down to the gates of death, that we may be loyal and love one another. Bob lived that prayer. Thank you. And now that big tease, Nancy Beckovac.
I need the time. I just want to take a minute to look at all of you. And I'll just tell you to begin with, I'm worried about crying, so I'll just give you that. My dad used to say, Nancy, your eyes are too close to your bladder. I'm carrying on a theme here. I first met Bob Denham in about October 1971. At the urging of David Schulte, who had spent a summer at Munger, he told me I should sign up to interview with this great bunch of lawyers in LA. LA, I said. Don't worry, he said. They give you a day off to go to Disneyland. I was shallow enough to go for it. And David was trustworthy. I walked into a wood-paneled office at Yale Law School to be met by a tall, soft-spoken, and very young Bob Denham. I thought, this is a little crazy. He's not a lot older than I am. But before we started, he apologized. He said, I have to make a very important phone call, and it's going to interrupt our interview. Oh, I said, that's no problem. I'll be glad to leave. No, you can stay. So we sat down and started talking about corporations and corporate responsibility. And then the time came and he stood up and said, I have to make my call. He assured me it would be short. He got up and walked over to the phone. Now, in those days, telephones were attached to the wall by wires. I say this for the young people. So he had to get up and walk over to the phone. And this is what I heard. Jeff, it's Daddy. No, I can't be there. I'm on the other side of the country. No, Mommy's going to go with you. Jeff, nothing's going to happen today. He's just going to look. No, he's not going to touch your teeth. Jeff, I promise I will come with you next time. Is that okay, Jeff? You're sure? Goodbye, Jeff. I love you. And with a big sigh, he hung up the phone. Well, that did me in. It was the first, but not the last time I fell in love with Bob Denham. Who would believe I had lucked into the one corporate lawyer in the United States who apparently had a heart? I learned he also had a soul, he had a sense of humor, and a great family. At the end of that interview, Bob asked me to round up some of my friends and to go to dinner. And he said, bring some people who will be interesting. It was Yale. That wasn't hard. So I went down to the front hall, and I invited Robert Reich, Hillary Rodham, Bill Clinton, and Bill Coleman III, whose dad was the Secretary of Transportation. I figured that would be pretty interesting, and it was. By the way, there was a beef shortage. None of us had seen a steak in months, and we all went out to a steak dinner. We had a truly great time. At the end of the dinner, Bob said he would give me a ride back to my house. No, I said, I can get a ride. He said, no. I said, oh, okay. So I got in the car, and he turned to me and he said, we'd like to make you a job offer for the summer. No, I said, you're supposed to hire Bob Reich. He's first in the class. He's really funny. And he said, Nancy, when we make a job offer, we expect people to answer the job offer. We don't expect them to tell us who to hire. I said, but really, you'd be better off with Bob Reich. He said, well, we want you. I said, what if I think about it for a while? He said, if you think about it, we have to have a committee meeting. And I really don't want to have a committee meeting. Oh, I said, if that'll cause you problems, sure, I'll take the job. I didn't manage to tell him that I'd already accepted one, and that got to be a problem, but we went on. By the way, David Schulte was right. I got to go to Disneyland, and I got to go with Bob and Jeff. In the decades after I took the job, and I never regretted that decision, I've become part of the outlying group of friends that surround the Denham family. Key among those interactions was that I tried to count last night, for probably 36 or 37 of the Thanksgivings after I joined the firm in 1974, I shared Thanksgiving with the Denhams. I got to see more and more of them over time. And it was one of those Thanksgivings I want to also remind you about. It was the Thanksgiving after 9/11. And we were all a little worried. Laura had seen it. Laura had been in New York, and she had a hard time coming back to LA because she had to get on an airplane. Not a really popular venture in those first weeks. It was a rainy and cold Thanksgiving. I remember Jeff arrived and Jilly was in his arms. She had fallen asleep. She woke up to eat, I just want you to know. We had quite a crew there that night, and it included, of course, Bob and Carolyn and Jeff and Wendy and Peter and Jilly and Laura and Bob's Uncle Lee, who was in a wheelchair. As I said, it was cold and rainy, and we had a fire, and we all gathered around the fire. And I don't know if any of you, some of you are old enough to remember 2001. It was an uncertain time. We were in a war in Iraq. Nobody knew what that was about. We had uncertain national leadership. We were all worried about terrorism. We didn't know what was coming next. But we had each other, and we made a wonderful party of people who cared about each other and cared about the kids and cared about the future. And we also had the Denham men's sour cherry pie to look forward to. Let me tell you, it's great pie. And almost the best thing about it is, if you played your cards right, you could get an extra piece to keep for the next day, and you could have sour cherry pie for breakfast, which is really the best thing. We had also come to terms, in a way, looking at Laura and listening to Laura, with the cost that we all paid for living through that piece of history. So it is today. Oh. It's the bladder thing, you know. All of us gathered in love, all of us thinking about Bob and his family. He was so much. I mean, he changed my life, and he taught me so many things. One of the things he taught me was the importance of family. Near the end of his life, the poet William Butler Yeats visited the newly opened Municipal Gallery in Dublin. And he looked around on the walls to see portraits of so many of his friends, the people he had helped make the Irish Revolution with, people who had helped him through what was a pretty unlucky life. And at one point, he wrote a wonderful poem called The Municipal Gallery Revisited. And at one point, he talks about being overcome and sitting down and thinking as he looks on these portraits of his friends. And I am in despair that time may bring approved patterns of women and of men, but not that self-same excellence again. Not that self-same excellence again.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Morgan. I'm honored to be with you today. I, too, may struggle with my emotions. So at today's church service, the pastor told us we can look for truth through stories and metaphors. Well, here are my stories and metaphors. I joined Munger Tolls in the fall of 1981. Rob Canas and I started on the same day. And Brad Bryan, a young up-and-comer named Brad Bryan, started on the same day. And I very quickly learned that Bob was unique. At the time, we had a colleague who had terrible personal problems that put him at risk and put the law firm at risk. And what today we would call an intervention occurred. And the firm had to send somebody to a rehabilitation camp to deliver some hard truths to our colleague. And the firm sent Bob. And I asked a senior lawyer at the time, why Bob? And this person said to me, Greg, there are a lot of smart lawyers at Munger Tolls. But if you want somebody whose judgment is as solid as the Rock of Gibraltar, you send Bob. And looking back and doing the arithmetic, Bob was 37 years old when that is how he was described. And many of us saw Bob's judgment in action. If you didn't see it, let me just tell you, it was like gravity. It was completely silent. It was always in operation, and it pulled you toward him. It was remarkable. I learned another important life lesson from Bob several years later. In 1991, the investment bank, Salomon Brothers, fell into crisis. Many of you have heard references to Salomon already. At the time, it was one of the largest financial institutions in the world, and its largest shareholder was Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett came in as the CEO. Bob Denham came in as the general counsel. And I know for a fact there are a lot of New York lawyers proposing themselves to be general counsel of Salomon Brothers. So again, the question, why Bob? And of course, Warren knew Bob and Warren trusted Bob. That is not, I believe, the answer to the question, why Bob? The answer to the question is because people know integrity when they see it. And Warren didn't just need somebody he could trust, he needed somebody everybody would trust, from the bond traders to the US attorneys. And Bob helped recreate trust in an institution that had squandered it. Now, there are several heroes in the Salomon story. Some of them are here today. But without Bob, the story would have been very different and not nearly so good. Bob and I did many things together, many of them for Berkshire Hathaway. And after I left the firm, I allowed my new colleagues to refer to me as Warren Buffett's lawyer. So the truth is, half of my phone calls from Warren began with Warren saying, "Greg, I was looking for Bob." And I couldn't find him, so I asked to be switched to you. And as I stand here, I would struggle to name the deals that Bob and I did together, to describe the legal issues that Bob and I worked on together. But I can nearly feel the breeze of the time Bob and I breathe, thank you. The time Bob and I went for a run in Omaha. I remember sharing Texas barbecue with Bob in Fort Worth. And I can hear Bob's voice explaining to me why Texas barbecue is better than any Kansas City barbecue. And I remember walking into Bob's office one day to tell him that I had made a serious mistake. And Bob looked at me and he said, "Oh dear." Just as quietly and calmly as that. And that was the entire amount of time Bob spent on how I had made my mistake. And we proceeded to fix it. What a blessing. What a blessing to have a Bob Denham in your life. Thank you. I get to introduce the other great Bob in my life, Bob Adler.
Hello, everyone. Wow, this is a tough day to follow a whole bunch of people who have spoken. I'll do my best. You know, when Bob Denham was in his prime at the Munger Tolles firm, I think that if the firm had kept two lists, one being the list of the most respected lawyers in the firm, and the other being the list of the most modest lawyers in the firm? Roy Tolles would have been on both lists, for sure, our founder. Bob Denham also would have been on both lists. So in retrospect, it should have been obvious that Bob Denham would become Munger Tolles' first so-called, I'm going to say so-called, managing partner. We actually didn't have a name for the new position at the time. I think we prided ourselves as being so unmanageable that any name for that position would have suggested more authority than we wanted to give. So like Clint Eastwood playing the man with no name, our tall Texan with the country drawl assumed the leadership position with no title. He was perfect for an undefined job of potentially great responsibility because he had everyone's respect, so he could be trusted. And he was completely modest, so he'd never overreach. He was just so darn approachable. And of course, he was darn smart to boot. He'd also be on any list in that law firm of the smartest lawyers. When Chuck Rickershauser, a name that most of you, I think, have heard before, led our original corporate department, the young Bob Denham was clearly his go-to colleague. In a law firm's constellation of finders, minders, and grinders, Bob Denham was Chuck's chief minder. It didn't take long for something or some problem to come to Chuck before he'd walk out of his office, walk into Bob's, and give it to him. That's the way it worked. Chuck's judgment of Bob's special talent was uncanny, and it was validated by Bob's extraordinary career that followed. Being chief minder for Chuck Rickershauser was not easy. Bob was always on call, always had to be ready, so much so that when a group of us in the corporate department whose names weren't in the firm, and that is everybody but Rickershauser and Tolles, when a group of us would go to a Dodger game in the afternoon, we looked like a pretty motley crew leaving the office. We were in dress shirts and pressed slacks and shiny shoes, hardly looking like Dodger fans, but we were serious about it. Bob came with additional equipment. Thank goodness it wasn't a briefcase. It was his yellow pad. Bob would sit there during the games on occasion. An idea would come or something would have to be written. And there he was, jotting it down. Chuck placed complete faith in Bob, and Bob returned it. He could never violate a trust. He was the original lawyer's lawyer and a completely unselfish one. Years later, after Bob returned to MTO from Solomon, I had the pleasure of actually becoming a client of his from time to time, and never with what I viewed as an easy problem. Discussing a legal challenge with Bob was often more like talking to a therapist than to a lawyer, and I can only say that I know about that secondhand. You asked your question, and more often than not, Bob didn't give you an answer. He came back at you with 2 or 3 more questions, probing, forcing you to go deeper, questioning whether you were even asking the right question. And so you go back and forth with him, unpeeling the proverbial onion, unwinding the ball of string, until you saw things more clearly. The exchange became a collaboration. He had a razor-sharp mind, but the gentility always of a comrade. You know, people have talked about him as a lawyer, they've talked about him as a person, but you can't really separate the two. Bob was a lawyer who's reflected the character that he has, and his character, I think, reflected his excellent lawyering. Others have talked about how important Bob's family, his faith, his service, his philanthropy were, in addition to his lawyering. You know, when Bob came back from New York, or was about to come back from New York, I wasn't sure whether he could do that. I had occasion to talk to him, and I said, you know, Bob, you sure you can come back to the firm? How can you come back to the farm after you've seen Paris? He looked at me like, you know, Bob did. He said, well, I'm looking forward to it. And then he added, and you know, Carolyn's got some great opportunities in California. And she supported me when I went back to New York. We dropped everything. And now I'm glad she's going to pursue those opportunities. And I'm going to support her, and I'm looking forward to it. There was no martyrdom in that statement from Bob, no self-righteousness, just unselfishness. That was him. I last saw Bob a few weeks before he passed. I visited with him, and with a twinkle in his eye, he said to me, he wasn't much on talking those days, and he asked me to carry the conversation. He said it with a twinkle in his eyes because he knew me well enough to know that he was giving me a great gift. A listener. I was quick to respond. Bob, I've said we've known one another for over 50 years. And I can honestly say that I never heard anyone who knows you say anything really bad about you. As I look around this gathering, if each of you ask yourself that question, I bet you come out the same way. Nobody's ever heard a bad thing said about Bob Denham. When I left my last meeting with Bob, I reflected on him and his qualities, his trustworthiness, his modesty, his intelligence, his generosity. The world definitely was a better place for his having graced it. May he rest in peace. And now I would like to introduce the distinguished Brad Bryant. Huh? No? Excuse me, the more distinguished Highland Chen.
Good afternoon. I'm Highland Chen. I'm the co-managing partner of Munger, Tolles & Olson. I think it's appropriate to also state in this crowd that I'm Polly class of 1992 and that I'm the mother of Claire Gallagher class of 2020 at Polly. I was lucky to know Bob in so many different ways. And the first way I want to talk about is Bob as a runner. Bob instilled a love of running into so many people in his family. It was an expression of his curiosity, of his steadfastness, and I was lucky to see him on so many weekends when I happened to be running around Pasadena at the same time he was. And it was easy to run into him because sometimes he'd be out there running for hours. I would see him on Arden Road near Poly. I would see him at the La Loma Bridge. I would go home and shower and go out to go get coffee, and there's Bob still running. It was especially fun to see him during the pandemic when none of us could get haircuts and Bob grew his hair out, long and silvery and flowing behind him. And one time Jeff and I were out riding our bikes and we whizzed by and I said, "Hey," and he said, "Who are you saying hi to?" I said, "That's Bob." And he didn't recognize him with the long flowing hair. And so I love that he's really instilled this love of running and the outdoors in so many people and so many members of his family. I was also lucky to get to know Bob as somebody who went to every Grandparents' Day, as someone mentioned previously, and to every back to school night and open house. And so my daughter Claire was in Julie's class at Poly, and Bob would stop me in the hallway at the firm and say, "Now, what do you think about this new flipped learning thing that they've got going on in this class?" I mean, he was so engaged. But the thing I want to talk about most are the enduring firm values that he has instilled in me and in so many of us at the firm. I joined the firm as a first-year associate in 2005. I'm a litigator, and so you would think that I wouldn't have much chance to cross paths with Bob. But I was lucky enough to get to work with him in many capacities, including as a third-year associate when I, for some reason, still unknown to me, I was asked to join a committee of all partners at the time that Bob was chairing to talk about the next managing partner. And I was very nervous in these meetings. It was all partners. I had no idea what I was doing there. But Bob was always looking out to ask me questions, include me in the conversation, let me feel comfortable expressing myself, soliciting my opinions, and talking to me even when we weren't in those big meetings, so I could feel comfortable sharing. He did this for so many people at the firm. He did this when no one was looking. He didn't do it for kudos. He didn't do it for recognition. He did this in service of others. And so when Peter spoke so eloquently about the love that he showed for his family, for us, I view it as an expression of service. You can call it mentoring, you can call it whatever you want in corporate speak, but really it's service to others. It's an enduring value of the firm that he has instilled in us. And the last thing I want to say is, this is an extraordinary time when many of us are thinking about firm values and what they mean. And the national news, it's headline news, whether law firm values are worth the ink and paper they are written on. And we all have to ask ourselves, will values like service and integrity endure? And if those values are to endure from generation to generation, and as lawyers come and go, as the mix of clients changes over time, as our practice groups change over time, they endure based on our individual and collective commitment to those values. And our commitment to those values is driven in part by our love, our respect, and our admiration for the people who instilled it in us. And our commitment to integrity, I would like to think, is an expression of our admiration and our love for Bob. I was lucky as a young partner to get to work with Bob. I was advising a multi-billion-dollar company that was going through a crisis that involved alleged wrongdoing of its president. And it came upon me to come up with, what do they do to make sure this doesn't happen in the future? And then partner, now Justice Greg Weingart, said to me, you should talk to Bob. So I did. And he spent 2 hours brainstorming ideas with me. With all of his experience on all the various boards, chairing the audit committee at Chevron, he asked me about, well, what can you do with the audit committee? We talked about it for 2 hours. And then later he sent me an email, which I still have. And he said, one more thought. And in just a few sentences, he distilled the wisest principle for corporate governance that I think today still endures as a best practice for every corporation. He said, you know, when I first became CEO and chair at Solomon Inc., I put in writing to the general counsel, the director of audit, the director of compliance, that they were to report to the board anytime they felt there was wrongdoing in the company that I wasn't appropriately addressing. And I copied the board on that communication, and that was meant as tangible evidence that their loyalty should be to the company and not to me. And that would avoid the mess that got Solomon into the Treasury auction scandal it got into in the first place. And in just a few sentences, he conveyed something very profound, but so plain-spoken and simple. Of course you would act with integrity at a time when it's most challenging, at a time when the company is in crisis, when the easy thing to do is to go into a defensive crouch and to not open the door to transparency. He showed integrity when it was hard to do. That is the ultimate measure of man. We have all learned from Bob. He has instilled in us these values, and we live it out every day through our love and our admiration and our respect for him. And I know that those values will endure. And we have the deepest gratitude for Bob. Thank you. And of course, it is my privilege to introduce our firm chair, Brad Bryan.
So when we were picking out the speakers today, who would have thought that Bob Adler would have been the shortest of all the speakers we picked out? Thank you, Bob. You know, as I was at the church today, and then listening to the remarks of the others today, so many of the same qualities kept being repeated. Generosity, modesty, integrity, judgment, calmness in the face of personal and professional crisis. Those are the qualities of Bob Denham. Those are why so many people relied on him. That's why the firm relied on him. That's why Warren and Charlie relied on him. That's why senior management and so many boards of directors relied on him. He had an incredible life, incredible life. I don't want to repeat what everybody has said. I'll try not to do that. I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about, like Nancy, I want to talk about the first time I met Bob. I want to talk about one little story while he was our first managing partner, which some of you, I think, will remember. And then I want to talk about the last time I saw Bob. So I met Bob in the fall of 1976. I was interviewing at Harvard Law School. He came to interview. And he invited me to dinner that night with him and Chuck Rickershauser, who's been named today. I guess Bob saw something in this kid who'd grown up the son of a high school baseball coach in South City. So and I'd heard about Chuck Rickershauser, so I went to meet Chuck and Bob. Chuck was an intimidating guy to some. Bob was calm, he was gentle, he was welcoming. It was that invitation, that dinner, changed my life forever. Like Nancy and Greg, I'm not going to make it through this. I'm internally grateful to Bob for that, internally grateful. Now, Bob Adler mentioned that Bob Denham was our first managing partner, though he didn't have a title. And of course he was. He was a person of great brilliance, integrity, warmth, modesty, judgment. But what Bob Adler, I guess Bob did mention, or somebody mentioned this, Bob Denham was a bit messy in those days. His office looked like one of those hoarder apartments where you need to find your way through the stacks of magazines to get your chair. And it wasn't just magazines on his desk. These were stacks of papers and everything. You literally had to move things just to get around. So remember, this was, in the early days, we were still a struggling young law firm. And one day, Bob got a call from a representative of our malpractice insurer who wanted to come out and meet the new managing partner and take stock of the firm. Were we the kind of firm that he could trust. Who was this managing partner? So, we were all amazed. I mean, Bob told the story, or somebody did, how Bob Denham was able to find a piece of paper, right? We were all amazed by that, but we weren't so sure that the insurer would have the same confidence when he walked into Bob's office. And in those days, if we had one conference room, I don't remember what it was. So we didn't have a conference room where they could meet. So we decided that we would move Bob to somebody else's office. And we would actually change the nameplate. So this is where you come in, Brad. Whose office did we pick? I told Brad I was going to mention him. We chose Brad Phillips's office. Now, Brad was the polar opposite of Bob Denham. His office was squeaky clean. It was right out of Architectural Digest. I mean, if there was a pen on the desk, you would be amazed. So that's what we did. We put Bob Denham in Brad Phillips' office. We literally changed the nameplate. The insurer came out, and he met with Bob Denham in what he thought was Bob Denham's spotless office. And I remember running into him, and he remarked, "God, I have so much confidence in that Bob Denham. He is so neat and organized." That's a true story. So I had the good fortune to meet with Bob about 4 or 5 weeks before he passed. I actually tried to meet him a second time, and that's when he took a turn for the worse. And Jeff and Wendy and Laura were so gracious to let me meet with Bob. I met upstairs. He was sitting in his lounge chair. And as, I guess it was Peter who described it, when I walked in, he had that infectious smile on his face. He immediately, he pulled you in with it. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about working together. I was a young pup on the Solomon Brothers crisis with Bob and Ron and others. I told him how much Warren and Charlie trusted him. He smiled again, that infectious smile. I told him of our plan to rebuild the corporate department under the leadership of Andy Grelick and Zach Byers and others. He smiled again. And then I thanked him. I thanked him for inviting me to dinner in 1976 and changing my life. And he then did something extraordinary. He said, "That was probably the best thing I ever did for the law firm." And I say that not to applaud me. It was just, this is a guy who'd helped save Solomon. He'd served on the board of directors of the New York Times, Chevron, MacArthur Foundation. Everybody trusted Bob Denham. But even as he sat there, knowing that within weeks he was going to die, he had that same generous spirit. He was looking to recognize somebody else and not himself. I did this once before, I think, when John Frank left the firm, and I did it this morning. I looked up in Merriam-Webster the definition of a partner. And this is verbatim. Now, it's one of the alternative definitions. It says, "One of the heavy timbers that strengthen a ship deck to support a mast." That is verbatim out of the dictionary. That is Bob Denham. He was that timber. He was the timber we all relied on. He was the one that clients relied on When there were problems, we turned to Bob Denham. I will miss Bob Denham forever. He was our partner. He was my friend. I love you, Bob. So Greg just said, that was very well done, but how do people know it's over? So it's over. But it's not really over because we have a reception out on the lawn, and I hope people can stay and have some great food and drinks and just talk about Bob and friendship and love. Thank you for coming.